Story 1. The Man Who Broke Energy Density. In 1991, inside a privately funded laboratory outside Salt Lake City, a senior electrochemist demonstrated a compact device that produced more energy than its input should have allowed. The setup was unremarkable. Benches, cooling lines, off-the-shelf sensors. What mattered was the output curve. Over a continuous 6-hour run, the device generated excess heat beyond chemical explanation. Not briefly, not once, repeatedly. The numbers kept rising. The meters didn't drift. The room went quiet. The scientist was not a fringe figure. He held federal grants. He had published for 2 decades, and he knew the history. Cold fusion had already been ridiculed. Careers had died there. That was why he documented everything. Independent calorimetry, redundant sensors, third-party observers from 2 universities, lab notebooks signed and time-stamped, video logs stored off-site. When the final run ended, one observer reportedly said nothing for a full minute, then asked to see it again. Within 3 weeks, the data had been shared under controlled conditions, not to journals, to reviewers with security clearances. The response came back cautiously worded but clear. The measurements were anomalous and warranted further evaluation. Funding was quietly extended. New equipment arrived without request. No press, no preprint. Then the phone stopped ringing. Then the badge stopped working. Then the doors were locked. Federal officials arrived with a seizure order citing national security. The device was removed. Drives were cloned. Paper notebooks were boxed and labeled. Everyone present signed non-disclosure agreements under penalty of prosecution. The lab was reclassified as a restricted facility. No explanation was given to the staff. The scientist was told his work would continue under new oversight. He was reassigned to a consulting role with no access to the project he created. The consequences were immediate and personal. His name vanished from grant databases. Scheduled conference talks were canceled without comment. Colleagues stopped responding to emails. At home, the stress compounded. His father was dying in another state. Travel permission was denied. He missed the final week. At the funeral, former collaborators avoided eye contact. Within a year, an internal memo described him as unreliable. 2 years later, he was declared mentally unfit to continue research. Officially, the invention never worked. No debunking paper was published. No replication attempt was acknowledged. The excess energy claim simply disappeared from the record. The scientist retired early, bound by permanent non-disclosure. When contacted decades later, he declined to speak. He only said, "They didn't say I was wrong. They said it was over." The device has never resurfaced. Sealed under executive order, within 19 days of verification. Story 2. The Woman Who Recorded Faster-Than-Light Noise. In October 2003, a postdoctoral physicist at a European Radio Observatory was tasked with filtering background interference from a deep space signal array. Her assignment was routine: isolate noise, discard anomalies, preserve clean data. Instead, she found a recurring spike brief, structured, and mathematically inconsistent with relativistic limits. The signal appeared to arrive before its reference pulse, not by milliseconds, by measurable margins that should not exist. The timestamp was wrong. Then it repeated. Then it locked in. She reran the analysis using separate clocks. Atomic synced. Isolated. The anomaly persisted. The signal exhibited internal modulation, not random scatter. This was not equipment chatter. It had pattern. She logged everything. Raw feeds, filtered outputs, environmental conditions. When a senior technician suggested clock drift, she replaced the timing module entirely. The result did not change. The spike still arrived early. Always early. She labeled the file set with a neutral identifier, lambda /October 3rd. Before escalating, she invited a colleague from a neighboring institute to observe a live run. He signed the logbook. The anomaly appeared on schedule. No one spoke for several seconds. He asked for a copy. She declined, citing protocol. Instead, She uploaded the dataset to university server and filed an internal report. The response came within hours. Not from her department, from administration. The server went offline. The report was reclassified. No one replied. Within days, her access privileges were reduced. She was instructed not to discuss the data pending review. A legal office issued a non-disclosure agreement referencing national security statutes she had never encountered. When she asked what agency was involved, the answer was procedural silence. The observatory director avoided her office. The array schedule was abruptly changed. The anomaly never appeared again, not because it vanished, but because the instruments were no longer pointed there. The consequences unfolded quickly. Her contract renewal was suspended. Conference travel approvals were denied. A paper draft saved locally was remotely deleted during a system update. When she attempted to retrieve the server logs, she was informed they no longer existed. Officially, the incident was attributed to timing synchronization artifacts. No corrective memo followed. No technical appendix. Just closure. There was a human cost. She had planned to return home after a symposium in Geneva to care for her mother, recently diagnosed with early-onset dementia. She never arrived. Her phone went unanswered for weeks. Eventually, colleagues learned she had resigned her position while abroad. No forwarding address was provided. Her university email was deactivated. Her publication record stopped mid-year. Skeptics later argued the anomaly was a known correlator error. That explanation might fit, except correlator faults leave signatures. This one did not. And correlator faults do not trigger legal NDAs. Years later, a partial procurement log surfaced showing emergency data transfer hardware installed at the observatory that same week. The destination field was redacted. The project code was not. It read, Lambda 4. Signal data elevated to undisclosed classification within 11 days. Story 3. The engineer who built an impossible alloy. In 2010, inside a small material startup outside Osaka, a mechanical engineer announced a prototype alloy that should have failed under its own specifications. The material was lightweight, machinable, and, according to preliminary tests, able to absorb stress far beyond known yield limits without permanent deformation. Not once. Repeatedly. The samples bent, returned to form, and showed no microfracturing under electron microscopy. The stress curves flattened. The fractures never came. The math didn't match. The engineer was cautious. He avoided grand claims. No press releases. No demonstrations for investors. Instead, he contracted an independent testing facility with no stake in the company. Their report confirmed the anomaly. Tensile resilience exceeded model predictions by an order of magnitude. Thermal cycling produced no fatigue. The lattice structure, captured in high-resolution scans, showed irregular bonding patterns not described in existing metallurgy literature. The lead technician noted, in writing, that the material behaved as if energy was being redistributed internally. Word traveled anyway. Within weeks, representatives from 2 multinational manufacturers requested samples. The engineer declined and filed a provisional patent instead. That filing triggered everything. The inbox filled. The phones rang. Then the visit came. Government officials arrived unannounced with a seizure authorization citing export control violations. The facility was shut down for inventory reconciliation. All alloy samples were confiscated, including test remnants stored for disposal. Hard drives were imaged. Design files were copied. Employees were separated and questioned individually. Each signed non-disclosure agreements that extended beyond employment. The patent application was placed under an indefinite security review. No timeline was given. The consequences were swift. The startup's accounts were frozen pending investigation. Within a month, the company dissolved. Employees were released without severance. Years of pension contributions were trapped in legal limbo. The engineer was offered a consulting contract with a defense-adjacent materials firm on the condition that he abandon all claims to the alloy. He refused. After that, no further offers came. There was a personal cost. His wife, pregnant with their first child, watched their savings evaporate. Stress complications followed. He missed multiple prenatal appointments while responding to legal notices. When their daughter was born, he was in another city, testifying under oath about material he was no longer allowed to describe. He arrived 2 days late. Officially, the alloy never existed. The independent lab retracted its report, citing methodological uncertainty. The startup's website went dark. Trade journals that had scheduled coverage quietly dropped the story. No counter-analysis was published. No failed replication announced. The material simply vanished from discourse. Years later, a former employee stated that every sample was logged, barcoded, and transported to a central repository. When asked where that repository was, he said he was not permitted to know. The transfer manifest carried a single marking in red ink. All samples logged and transferred under export control within 27 days. Story 4. The biologist who stopped cellular death. In 2014, inside a biomedical research institute in Sao Paulo, a senior cell biologist documented something her discipline treats as a movable law. Human somatic cells, cultured under controlled conditions, continued dividing past the Hayflick limit. Not briefly, not as an outlier. They stabilized. Telomeres shortened, then stopped. Senescence markers failed to appear. The cells remained functional. The cultures stayed alive. The clock stopped ticking. The plates kept dividing. She had spent her career studying cellular aging. She knew contamination. She knew artifacts. That was why the experiment ran in parallel across 3 labs using blinded samples. Controls aged normally. The treated cultures did not. The intervention was simple. An unconventional protein folding catalyst introduced at a precise phase of replication. It did not alter DNA. It altered timing. Lab notes show her writing once. This should not persist. It did. The evidence mounted quietly. Fluorescence microscopy confirmed membrane integrity. Gene expression stayed stable. No oncogenic markers appeared. After 60 population doublings beyond the expected limit, she authorized a restricted animal trial under existing regenerative medicine protocols. Tissue samples regenerated without scarring. The animals showed no abnormal growth. Internal review boards approved continuation. Then the approvals were revoked. No explanation. No vote. Just an email. The suppression came framed as ethics. A surprise audit cited unapproved procedural deviations. Funding was suspended pending investigation. The lab was shut down for biosafety review. Freezers were sealed. Cultures were destroyed under supervision. Data servers were removed for compliance verification. The institute announced a pause out of an abundance of caution. The biologist was barred from campus during the review. Patients enrolled in a compassionate use pilot were quietly removed from the study and referred elsewhere. They were never told why. The consequences extended beyond the lab. Her graduate students lost visas tied to program. Years of work evaporated. One patient, a burn victim whose tissue had shown unprecedented regeneration, was returned to conventional treatment. The scarring was severe. He asked why the trial ended. No one answered him. The biologist's own career stalled. Journals declined submissions without review. Grant agencies cited reputational risk. She was advised informally to shift focus or retire. Officially, the research failed ethical standards. No technical rebuttal was issued. No replication attempt published. The protein catalyst was never evaluated in open literature. Within a year, the Institute amended its policies on cellular lifespan research, adding new approval layers that effectively halted similar studies. A partial document surfaced later through a transparency request, a transfer receipt showing that select data backups were not destroyed but relocated to a restricted biomedical archive jointly administered with the Defense Health Agency. The destination code was blacked out. The date was not. It was 3 days after the final successful replication. Research files relocated to restricted biomedical archive within 72 hours. Story 5. The physicist who bent gravity. In 1987, at a government-funded physics lab in Eastern Europe. A theoretical physicist overseeing applied field experiments reported a deviation no one had authorization to see. Using a rotating superconductive assembly, his team observed a localized reduction in effective mass above the apparatus. Objects did not float. They weighed less. The change was small but consistent, measurable across multiple instruments. The scale dipped, then dipped again. The room went silent. This was not an accident. The experiment was designed to test inertial coupling under extreme rotational fields. What emerged instead was a repeatable anomaly, a narrow column above the device where gravitational force weakened by a fraction of a percent. Laser interferometry confirmed displacement changes. Mechanical scales registered the same variance. Environmental controls ruled out vibration and thermal lift. The physicist ordered the setup rebuilt from scratch. New parts, new sensors. Same result. He logged everything and requested an internal review. The evidence triggered attention far above his pay grade. Senior administrators arrived unannounced. The lab's reporting chain was altered overnight. Data copies were requested, not originals, but everything. A classified addendum was appended to the project file. Within weeks, a defense contractor assumed technical oversight of the experiment. The physicist was instructed to brief a closed panel and then step back. The questions narrowed. The access shrank. The doors closed. Suppression followed quietly. The lab was absorbed into a larger facility under a different name. The experiment was reclassified as exploratory noise. All external communications were prohibited. The physicist was offered a transfer to an administrative research role, far from instrumentation. He declined. After that, his clearance was suspended pending review. He was escorted from facility one afternoon and told to await further instruction. None came. There was a human cost. His family lived in state housing tied to his position. When his clearance lapsed, so did their residents. They relocated abruptly. His daughter, midway through her final school year, did not graduate with her class. Years later, she would say she remembered the boxes more than the explanations. The physicist himself vanished from the publication record. Former colleagues avoided discussing him. Official biographies ended mid-decade. One skeptical explanation exists. The anomaly could have resulted from electromagnetic interference affecting the measurement instruments rather than gravity itself. That possibility was examined and dismissed internally after cross-instrument verification using non-electronic mass references. Officially, no gravity manipulation was ever achieved. No failure report was published. No correction issued. The defense contractor retained the equipment and the data. The project name changed. The budget increased. The physicist's name was removed from subsequent documentation, replaced by a project code. Years later, a declassified expense ledger revealed something odd. Funding for the program tripled after his removal. The stated objective shifted from field characterization to applied mass modulation. There was no public explanation for the change. The physicist was never formally accused of error. He was simply excluded. Project renamed and funding tripled within 41 days of reclassification. Story 6. The chemists who created room-temperature superconductors. In 2018, at a national laboratory partnered with a major U.S. university, a mid-career chemist synthesized a ceramic composite that behaved unlike any known superconductor. Under standard atmospheric pressure and at room temperature, electrical resistance dropped to effectively zero. Not briefly, not under pulse conditions. Sustained. The current flowed without loss. The resistance vanished. The heat stayed flat. The graphs broke expectation. The chemist did not announce it. He assumed error. The sample was remade using different precursors, different furnaces, different technicians. The result persisted. Magnetic flux pinning was observed. The Meissner effect appeared cleanly. Thermal cameras showed no hidden cooling. A neighboring lab was invited to test the material blind. Their instruments registered the same behavior. One researcher reportedly laughed, then asked to repeat the measurement with his own probes. The evidence moved upward quickly. An internal replication memo recommended immediate publication with caution. Before that could happen, a national security review was triggered under critical infrastructure provisions. The chemist was instructed to halt all external communication. The samples were placed in controlled storage. Access logs tightened. The calendar froze. The email stopped. The doors locked. Suppression followed procedure. A classification review board cited potential applications in power transmission and defense systems. Publication was embargoed indefinitely. Patent filings were placed under secrecy order. Graduate students assigned to the project were reassigned without explanation. When the chemist requested a timeline, he was told the review had expanded in scope. Within months, oversight shifted from a single agency to a multinational committee operating under treaty authority. There was a personal cost. 2 doctoral candidates lost years of work and were advised to change fields. One left academia entirely. The chemist himself was removed as principal investigator and reassigned to administrative duties. His lab was repurposed. At home, the pressure mounted. His spouse described him as present but already gone. He missed his son's science fair, the one where the boy built a model power grid, and asked why electricity was wasted as heat. Officially, the claim was never validated. No refutation paper appeared. No replication was denied. The material was described in annual reports only as anomalous conductive behavior under investigation. That phrase repeated for 3 consecutive years. Then it disappeared. A year later, a procurement record surfaced showing specialized cryogen-free magnetic containment systems purchased at a lab, equipment unnecessary for ordinary research, but ideal for handling superconducting materials at scale. The justification paragraph was redacted. The approving authority was not. The chemist still works at the institution. He publishes regularly, just not on that project. When asked about it at a conference, he smiled once and said, "Some results don't belong to us." Security review escalated to multinational oversight within 58 days. Story 7. The astronomer who detected artificial time drift. In 2009, at a high-altitude observatory in the Andes, an astronomer analyzing pulsar timing data noticed a discrepancy that refused to average out. Pulsars are cosmic clocks. Their emissions are precise to fractions of a microsecond. Yet one source showed a repeating offset, small, consistent, and synchronized with nothing natural. The signal arrived early, then corrected itself. Over and over, the pulse was ahead. Then normal, then ahead again. At first, she suspected software error. Timing pipelines were rebuilt. Atomic clock references were cross-checked against international standards. The offset persisted. Environmental interference was ruled out. What made the anomaly disturbing was its structure. The drift followed a stepwise pattern, not a curve. It looked imposed. She annotated her notes with a cautious phrase, non-random temporal modulation. She did not publish. She requested a quiet internal review. The evidence drew attention from outside the observatory. A visiting analyst from a defense-affiliated research unit asked for access to the raw timing arrays. He stayed for 3 days. When he left, he took copies. Within a week, the observatory received notice that its funding allocation would be reevaluated. The telescope schedule was altered. The pulsar was removed from active observation. The target was dropped. The data was locked. No reason was given. Suppression came indirectly. Budget cuts were announced without explanation. Support staff were released. The astronomer's position, tied to a specific grant, was not renewed. She was encouraged to apply elsewhere. When she attempted to include the anomaly in a broader survey paper, reviewers rejected it as speculative without technical critique. Internal emails warned against misinterpretation of timing artifacts. No corrective analysis followed. There was a human cost. Housing at the observatory was contingent on employment. She and her partner had 2 weeks of leave. The move ended their plans to start a family in the region. Years later, she would say the hardest part was not losing the data, but losing the sky she had studied every night. The pulsar was reassigned to a different catalog designation. Its anomaly was never mentioned again. Officially, no artificial time drift was detected. The observatory's annual report listed the episode as a calibration irregularity. Yet a transfer record later showed that the raw timing datasets were forwarded to a defense analysis unit specializing in signal intelligence. The receiving office was not astronomical. In a closed workshop years later, an anonymized slide circulated showing a pulsar timing graph identical to hers. Same offset, same cadence. The slide carried no attribution, only a label in the corner. Temporal anomaly, level 3. Raw timing data, reassigned to defense analysis within 34 days. Story 8. The mathematician who solved predictive chaos. In 2016, at a private research institute in the northeastern United States, a mathematician working on nonlinear systems published nothing, and alarmed everyone anyway. His work focused on chaotic prediction, markets, weather, conflict escalation, domains defined by noise. His claim was modest. He believed short-term chaos could be bounded probabilistically better than existing models allowed. What he produced went further. The forecast landed, then landed again, then refused to miss. Using a hybrid topology and machine learning, he built a model that did not predict exact outcomes. It predicted constraint corridors, narrow ranges within which events were forced to occur. When tested retroactively, the model flagged multiple historical black swan events days before they happened. Forward tests were worse. A commodity spike, a regional power outage, a sudden market correction. Each fell inside the corridor. Observers stopped calling it coincidence. The evidence triggered internal containment. Access to the model was restricted. Test inputs were limited. A small oversight group monitored outputs in real time. One internal memo warned that public release could cause self-fulfilling destabilization. The mathematician objected. He argued the model described reality. It did not create it. The room disagreed. The tone changed. The door closed. Then the breadcrumbs surfaced. During a closed demonstration, an external reviewer asked about a specific dataset used to anchor the model's temporal weighting. The mathematician referenced an old astronomical timing anomaly, publicly dismissed years earlier. He pulled a file header to show provenance. The label was unmistakable, lambda for /October 3rd. The same identifier tied to the faster-than-light signal recorded and erased more than a decade before. The room went still. The demonstration ended early. Suppression accelerated. The Institute's legal team intervened. The model was designated dual-use predictive technology. Copies were seized. The mathematician was instructed to cease development immediately. Within 48 hours, a sealed directive authorized federal custody of the system. He was told this was for his protection. The servers went dark. The badges failed. The call stopped. There was a human cost. He had a daughter in her final year of high school. He missed her graduation while held for questioning at an undisclosed facility. No charges were filed. No explanation given. When he returned home weeks later, his office had been cleared. His employment contract was terminated under a morality clause he had never noticed. His colleagues would not meet his eyes. Officially, the model was flawed. A spokesperson later claimed it overfit historical noise. No technical rebuttal was released. No countermodel published. Quietly, however, a defense forecasting unit expanded its budget the following quarter. A procurement request listed chaotic corridor analysis modules. The justification section was fully redacted. Years later, a leaked briefing slide surfaced from a closed government symposium. It showed a familiar graph, narrow predictive bands constraining future events. In the footer, a reference remained uncensored. Source correlation, lambda for validated. The mathematician has not published since. He declined interviews. Through an intermediary, he offered one sentence. They weren't afraid of being wrong. They were afraid of being early. Predictive system classified and seized under dual-use authority within 9 days. Story 9, the inventor who closed the loop. In 2020, during a classified energy systems challenge run jointly by public and private partners, an independent inventor submitted a design that forced a closed-door review. The system combined three ideas long treated separately: anomalous energy gain, advanced materials resilience, and predictive control. On paper, it should have failed. In simulation, it stabilized. In prototype, it did something worse. The output balanced, then exceeded, then refused to collapse. The device was not a perpetual machine. It was a managed loop, a system that used predictive constraint modeling to anticipate instability before it formed, rerouting load in real time through an exotic alloy framework. The control layer referenced a forecasting algorithm licensed under restricted terms. One reviewer flagged the code lineage immediately. The header carried an old identifier. A date appeared. A name did not. Lambda for /October 3rd. The evidence escalated the response. Demonstrations were halted after the third successful run. Internal emails marked the project as cross-domain sensitive. Observers from multiple agencies attended the next briefing. No notes were permitted. The inventor was praised for innovation, then instructed not to proceed further. The prototype was transferred to a secure facility. All digital records were cloned. The light stayed on. The room emptied. The door sealed. Suppression was total. A media blackout clause was invoked retroactively. The inventor's legal identity was flagged for protection, then effectively erased. Corporate affiliations dissolved. Online records vanished. A shell company absorbed the intellectual property under emergency authority. When journalists later inquired about the challenge outcomes, the entire program was described as theoretical exploration without viable results. There was a human cost. The inventor had 2 children from a previous marriage. Custody arrangements became impossible once his employment record disappeared. The children were placed with relatives temporarily. Temporary became permanent. He missed birthdays. He missed phone calls he was not allowed to answer. One relative later said he sent letters that arrived already opened. Officially, no integrated system ever worked. Energy gains were described as accounting artifacts. Materials behavior was attributed to batch variance. Predictive control was dismissed as overfitting. Each explanation alone might be plausible. Together, they required coincidence layered on coincidence. Then the callback appeared. A year later, a partially declassified infrastructure memo referenced a self-stabilizing energy platform, achieving sustained operation during a 72-hour test window. The footnote cited 3 legacy inputs: anomalous calorimetry, adaptive lattice materials, and temporal constraint forecasting Lambda 4. The date of origin was listed as October 2003. No inventor was named. The loop had been closed. Classification level raised the highest tier after third successful run. Story 10, the final file. In late 2022, a systems analyst working under contract for a federal records integration project noticed a conflict no one else was meant to see. While reconciling legacy databases scheduled for declassification, he found repeated cross-references that should not have existed. Different agencies, different decades, same internal marker, same date, same structure, same silence. The marker was not a project name. It was a routing key, used to move sensitive material between compartments without leaving a visible trail. When he mapped its appearances, 10 separate programs aligned: energy, signals, materials, biology, forecasting. Each tied back to a suppressed incident, each tied to a vanished researcher. At the center of the web sat a familiar phrase, redacted in most instances but intact in 2. Lambda for /October 3rd. The evidence was mundane and devastating. Transfer receipts, budget escalations, classification memos that skipped levels. In several cases, the same oversight panel signed off within days of each other, despite unrelated subject matter. The analysts realized this was not ad hoc suppression. It was a standing mechanism, a system designed to intercept breakthroughs that destabilized existing limits and to disappear the people who made them visible. He compiled an archive, not conclusions, just documents. He followed protocol and submitted it internally. The response was immediate. His access was revoked. His contract was terminated for data handling irregularities. A legal notice warned him against retaining copies of government material. The login failed. The phone rang once. Then nothing. There was a human cost. He had planned to relocate with his partner after the contract ended. Instead, he went silent. Friends received messages advising them not to ask questions. His partner later said he packed one bag and left at dawn. He missed their anniversary. He never explained why. Officially, the archive does not exist. The analyst is described as a temporary contractor whose work was incomplete, yet fragments of the files surfaced months later through unrelated declassification releases. Single pages, isolated tables, misfiled attachments. When assembled, they still align. 10 cases, 1 routing key, 1 escalation pathway. The final document in the archive is a time-stamped directive, partially redacted. The visible line reads, upon verification, initiate lambda for containment. The date stamp is October 17, 2003. No explanation follows. The inventions may have failed. The science may be wrong. But the system that erased them is real, and it is still active. Containment directive reaffirmed across agencies over 19 years.